Swap lines are one of the most important things you've never heard of. Warren Buffett famously stated that derivatives are financial weapons of mass destruction. But swap lines are far more destructive to a nation when factored the politicization of sovereign reserves. Swap lines are a cunning strategy, and the current shift in geopolitics globally will be the first major implementation of swap lines because of war, not a global financial crisis. For those who think Putin will be able to break the US dollar reign of global dominance, please pay attention. The US Federal Reserve satisfies the global demand for dollars while maintaining the dollar's title as the planet-wide currency king. With one brilliant move, the US has divided the world up into allies and non-allies of the US. Today, everyone needs the stability of the US dollar in a world turned upside down with economic turmoil. Granted, that stability may be only relative to other countries' own currencies, but American allies have to deal with that reality. They know it, and the Fed knows it. That's why the Fed has created a path to access US dollars for governments identified as real allies of the United States of America. And it has denied access to those identified as unfriendly. It's critical that you understand this, and when you do, you'll be miles ahead of almost everyone else. The US has put a system in place where all but the most die-hard anti-American nations will want to be included among the friendlies. In fact, many will do anything to make the list. And how do they do this? Through swap lines. Never heard of them? Then you're not alone. For the most part, when I bring up swap lines, I have found myself speaking into a vacuum. I haven't come across one person in 100 that knows about them. And that includes business executives, even politicians, and even big shots in the financial industry itself. Most investors are not even cognizant of the program's existence, much less aware of its significance. But given how important swap lines are to the global economy, every investor should understand them and how they work. So, what are swap lines? First things first, it's how the Fed explains swap lines on its own website. If you have access to US swap line, you are what I call a positive swap line nation. If you don't have access to a swap line, you are a negative swap line nation. Swap lines are a financial lifeline for nations. In the wake of any global panic, the most recent example being the COVID pandemic starting in 2020, many central banks requested that the America provide financial assistance to at least alleviate the stress caused by a lack of US dollars. Swap lines have provided that relief and will continue to do so. They are literally lifelines, and they are also debts to the United States of America. All those dollars borrowed must be paid back in US dollars with interest, also requiring dollars. It's ingenious because demand for the US dollar breeds further demand for the US dollar. And this will be proven to be even more true during a global power realignment. It will be paramount for nations grappling with inflation to enter the favored group capable of exercising swap lines. What you're looking at right now is the current list of nations that have access to US dollar swap lines as of today. Countries outside the group, the ones that we call negative swap line nations, will continue to struggle to access US dollars. Swap lines are important for politicians and investors. The result of how this program is set up is that countries receiving swap lines will follow any stipulations they are asked to follow. They have no choice. Suppose you want to be blessed with a swap line from the US. In that case, you must be careful not to antagonize the hand that feeds you. This means not aligning in any way with nations designated as non-friendly and agreeing to follow any restrictions such as sanctions that the US government puts on. The struggling nations that require emergency access to US dollars can't get them. Could engage in the expropriation of foreign-owned assets as the world's recession deepens? Good luck. For example, recently Papua New Guinea tried to revoke Barrick's gold social license. Several months later, Barrett gave the PNG government a 51% stake in the mine. Now the mine is back in production. The PNG government is not the only nation trying to flex its muscles. Chile is trying to do the same in the copper markets. Now think about what some of the STANS nations like Kyrgyzstan. It's either that or face crippling depressions or revolutionary uprisings of their citizens. So, American businesses with operations in these places that have negative swap lines should be aware. And more importantly, so should their investors. Swap lines will always defend American interests. As global crossflation progresses, there will be more nations that will be granted swap lines. But do not forget, swap lines will always defend American interests. Make no mistake, this is big business and even bigger power. The last time that foreign central banks took down a huge amount of US swap lines was at the height of the 2020 COVID crisis. The swap lines worked during the 2008 global financial crisis and prevented a complete worldwide financial meltdown. The same thing happened in the 2020 COVID crisis. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Few want to be shut out, and around 85 nations have applied for US swap lines. Remember, only 14 central banks have been approved, but in the EU Central Bank does make up 27 nations. Interestingly enough, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has publicly confessed to having swap line envy. To be approved, all those nations must solidify their positions as US allies by falling into line with the US policies. Do you think they will? Of course they will. And with Russia's military attack on Ukraine, the allies with positive swap lines and those that want access to swap lines of the US will be tested. More nations will be added. Over time, I expect these critically important swap lines to be increased and more nations to be slowly added. They'll be subject to terms set by the US government, both financially and geopolitically. And of course, they'll exceed. As monetary and fiscal policy are blending into one, it's just a matter of time before the president uses swap lines as a big geopolitical leverage hammer. Swap lines are that important, and they will dictate global alliances and policy. So please pay attention to them. Because I promise you, they will have an impact on companies, investments, and ultimately the very fabric of our world. If you have a producing asset in a negative swap line nation, you must be prepared for potential setbacks for things to go wrong. We literally have a counting track of multiple nations monthly that are attacking assets owned in negative swap line nations, and that will continue. It's about properly understanding and pricing risk in the current market, something that has become overlooked in the financial resource sector. Swap lines in your portfolio. Because I believe nations who do have existing swap lines won't screw with foreign operating entities, for example, American companies, to the extent of the negative swap line nations. I still expect higher taxes in all countries. It's the one thing that politicians can successfully implement, and it's the only thing politicians across the world have executed effectively throughout time. This means mining assets in positive swap line nations won't nationalize their gold mines, copper mines, etc. Those nations won't screw with America. Nations with existing US swap lines won't put Forex restrictions on foreign American companies operating there. Negative swap line nations may do so, and many have. This will cause less, and in some cases prevent those US dollars in negative swap line nations from being sent back home as dividends to the owners of the company. Know the plan, read the playbook, and most of all, be prepared. You can get my team and me to do the heavy lifting for you throughout my premium research service, Katusa's Resource Opportunities, known as the KRO. I'll tell you exactly what I'm doing, where I'm investing, and how you can follow what I'm doing. Stay safe. Subscribe to the KRO, which is a Katusa Resource Opportunities, to find out exactly what prices I'm buying at and what price I sell at before the trade occurs. And you get to sell before I do. If you want to give your portfolio an edge, consider becoming a member and giving it a try for yourself.